The boardroom on the 31st floor of Harwick Group's Toronto Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that made the February sky look like a painting nobody wanted to buy. Patricia Howe stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed, watching the door open 22 minutes late, and felt something cold settle behind her eyes. Nobody in that room knew that by 9 o'clock that evening, the man who just walked in would pull her daughter from a burning car on the Gardiner Expressway. Nobody knew that Patricia Howe's very precise, very controlled world was about to come apart at the seams. If you want to understand how a single wrong assumption can cost you everything, stay until the end. The man who came through the door was wearing a flannel shirt, work trousers with a paint smear on the left knee, and steel-toed boots that had seen better winters. His name was Gabriel Reyes, and he was the building maintenance coordinator for Harwick Group's downtown properties. He was holding a cardboard coffee cup and breathing like he'd taken the stairs. Patricia did not move. She had built Harwick Group from a two-person consulting shop into one of the largest commercial property firms in Ontario. She had done it by waking up before everyone else, staying later than everyone else, and treating lateness not as a minor inconvenience, but as a window into a person's character. If you couldn't respect someone else's time, you couldn't be trusted with anything that mattered. She was 39 years old. She had a daughter, Bridget, who was 11 and lived primarily with her father. She had a CFO named Henry who wore bow ties unironically. She had 11 members of her executive team sitting at this table right now, and every single one of them had been here when the meeting was supposed to start at 10 o'clock sharp. Gabriel Reyes had not been. Mr. Reyes. Her voice was even. She'd learned years ago that you didn't need volume to be frightening. He looked up. His eyes were calm in a way that surprised her. Not defiant, just steady, like a man who'd already decided how this was going to go and had made his peace with it. Mrs. Howe. He nodded once. I apologize. I should have been here 20 minutes ago. You should have been here 22 minutes ago. This meeting was on the calendar for 3 weeks. I know. We were discussing the new safety assessment protocols for the King Street properties. Your department submitted those reports. I know that too. Someone at the far end of the table shifted in their seat. Patricia took 3 steps toward him. In her heels, she was almost his height. Do you want to tell me why you're late? Something moved behind his eyes, not fear, not embarrassment, something quieter and more complicated. Not particularly, he said. There was a sound, someone suppressing a breath. Henry, probably. Henry was always the one who sucked in air when things were about to get sharp. I see. Patricia uncrossed her arms. Here's what I see when I look at this situation. I see a man who was given specific instructions, a specific time, and couldn't follow through on either. I see someone who doesn't believe the rules apply to him. Gabriel Reyes did not argue. He stood there with his coffee cup and his paint-smeared trousers, and he just looked at her, the way a person looks at a storm they can't do anything about. I don't make excuses, he said quietly. You just made one. You said not particularly. That's a soft no. You're right. I'm sorry. Henry cleared his throat. Patricia, we could reschedule the safety. We're not rescheduling. She didn't look away from Gabriel. I want everyone in this building to understand something very clearly. It doesn't matter what your title is or what department you're in. You cannot do your job if you can't show up on time to do it. That's the standard. That's how we operate. Gabriel's jaw was tight. There was something behind his eyes she couldn't read, something that had been there a long time before today. You're dismissed, she said. Permanently. HR will have your final check ready Monday morning. Leave your access card and keys with reception on the way out. He didn't argue. That was the thing that stayed with her afterward. In the meeting, she carried on for another hour without being able to remember a single word of it. Gabriel Reyes just nodded once, put the coffee cup down on the credenza near the door, pulled his key card and a small brass key from his pocket and set them quietly beside it, like he was leaving a tip. Thank you for the opportunity, he said. Then he walked out. The door clicked shut. The room was silent. Standards apply to everyone, Patricia said. Her voice didn't shake. Now, page 4 of the report. Henry, please. Henry opened his folder. He did not look at her. Gabriel took the elevator down alone. The lobby of Harwick Group was all granite and glass and potted ferns that someone watered every Tuesday. He walked past the security desk where his friend Danny was working the morning shift. Heading out early? Danny asked. For good. Gabriel set his badge on the counter, something like that. Danny frowned. How? Gabriel nodded. Damn. Danny shook his head. You okay? I'll figure it out. Gabriel zipped his jacket. Take care of yourself. Outside, the February cold was serious. Toronto in February didn't threaten. It delivered. Gabriel walked 2 blocks to the streetcar stop and stood on the platform with a half-dozen other people who all looked like they'd rather be indoors. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter's school. Reminder, Rosie's science project presentation is Thursday at 2 p.m. Hope to see you there. He typed back, I'll be there. Then he stood there on the platform with the cold coming through his jacket and thought about what he was going to tell Rosie when she asked how his day went. He'd raised her mostly alone for 4 years. Her mother had left, not died, just left, when Rosie was 6, and what had seemed like a wound at the time had slowly calcified into something he'd made his peace with. He was 43. He had a daughter who was 10 who was obsessed with weather patterns and had a collection of pressed leaves organized by species. He had a one-bedroom apartment in Leslieville where Rosie slept in the bedroom and he slept on the fold-out, and it wasn't much, but it was theirs. He'd taken the maintenance job at Harwick because it had steady hours, because it let him be at the school gate at 3:15 without fail, because nobody called him at midnight asking him to fix something. His background was in structural engineering. He'd done 8 years of it before Rosie's mother left, and everything had to be reconfigured around a small person who needed breakfast and bedtime stories, and a dad who was actually present. The streetcar came. He got on and found a seat and took out the paperback he kept in his jacket pocket, a worn copy of a Larry McMurtry novel he'd read before but kept returning to. Something about it settled him. Stories about people who just did what needed doing. His phone buzzed again. Rosie. Dad, did you eat breakfast? Yes. What did you have? Oatmeal. That's a lie. You had coffee. He smiled despite everything. I had oatmeal and coffee. Very nutritious. Love you too, kid. He got off at his stop and walked 4 blocks to the apartment building, 3rd floor. He let himself in, hung his jacket, and sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop open and started looking at job listings. Building management, facilities coordinator, property maintenance supervisor. He wasn't worried, not yet. He had 6 weeks of savings if he was careful. But careful meant no margin for anything unexpected, and with Rosie, something unexpected was always approximately 15 minutes away. His phone rang. The school's number. His stomach dropped. He answered before the second ring. Patricia's afternoon was meetings stacked on meetings. Investor call at 1. Legal review at 2:30. Board prep at 4. She moved through them efficiently the way she always did, which was the only way she knew how to move through anything. By 7, she was back at her desk with a glass of water and a spreadsheet that had been making less and less sense for the past hour. Her assistant knocked. Your ex called. Tell him to contact my lawyer. He says it's about Bridget. Patricia's hand stopped on the mouse. He didn't say much, the assistant added carefully. Just that you should call him back tonight. Fine. Send Henry in if he's still here. Her CFO appeared 2 minutes later with a look on his face she didn't like. Sit down, she said. He sat. He didn't open his folder. This morning, he said. Gabriel Reyes, I'm not revisiting personnel decisions. He was 22 minutes late. He was. Do you know why? Patricia leaned back. Henry, I'm serious. Do you know? She looked at him. Henry Baird had been her CFO for 4 years. He wore bow ties and kept a photo of his retired racing greyhound on his desk, and had never once in 4 years told her something she wanted to hear when she didn't want to hear it. She respected that about him, in theory. I didn't ask, she said. Maybe you should have. He could have told me. Could he? In front of 30 people while you were telling him you didn't accept excuses? The room was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what it did in February, pressing itself flat under a gray sky. You're my CFO, she said. You don't get to manage how I handle my people. I'm your friend, Henry said. And I'm telling you, as your friend, that man has a daughter. He raises her alone. Something happened this morning at her school. I heard it from someone in admin who heard it from the security desk. He got a call, apparently, on his way in, about a threat near the school. Patricia was quiet. He still came in, Henry said. He was 22 minutes late, but he came. She picked up her water glass, set it down again. He could have said that. Would it have mattered? The question sat between them. I don't know, she said, which was the most honest thing she'd said all day. Henry stood up. For what it's worth, I think you're a good leader. I think you built something real here, but I think you've confused being hard with being fair. They're not the same thing. He paused at the door. Also, David called again about Bridget's recital on Friday. I know about the recital. Do you know you have a dinner that night? She didn't answer. I'll move it, Henry said and left. She sat alone for a while. Her phone rang, David, Bridget's father. She almost didn't pick up. Then she did. What's going on? She's okay. He said it first, which told her something had happened. She's okay, Trish, but there's been an accident. On the Gardner. I need you to come to St. Michael's. Everything in her went still. What kind of accident? She's okay. She's got a cut on her head and her wrist hurts, but she's okay. But a transport truck. He stopped. She could hear him trying to hold it together. The car spun out. There was a fire. Trish, someone pulled her out before the fire department got there. Someone pulled her out of the car. Patricia was already on her feet, already reaching for her coat. Who? She said. Who pulled her out? I don't know his name yet. A man. The paramedics have him too. He got burned. She was already moving. I'm 10 minutes out. Michael's emergency department was bright and relentless and full of people. Patricia pushed through the doors and found David in the hallway outside the trauma bay, looking 10 years older than he had at Christmas. Where is she? They're stitching the cut on her head. It's not deep. Her wrist is sprained, not broken. He put his hands on Patricia's arms and she let him, which was not something she usually allowed. She's okay. I promise she's okay. Tell me what happened. He walked her through it. Bridget had been coming back from her school's swim meet with 2 other families. Black ice on the ramp onto the gardener. The car had spun, clipped the barrier, come to rest against the guardrail at an angle. The fuel line had started leaking. The other 2 children had gotten out on their own. Bridget's door had been jammed. The fire started small, David said. She was screaming. There was traffic stopped behind them. People were getting out of their cars, but nobody was going in. The smoke was bad. And then this guy came from nowhere, from the traffic backup. He had a toolbox in his truck. He was in a work truck. He used a pry bar on the door, got it open, pulled Bridget out. By the time the fire spread to the cabin, he was already 20 meters back with her. Patricia sat down in one of the plastic chairs. He burned his hands, David said, and his forearm. He inhaled some smoke. The paramedics took him. Where is he now? Down the hall. They said he was treated and was getting ready to leave. He gave a statement to the police and just. David shook his head. He didn't even want to stay. He kept asking if the girl was okay. Patricia stood up. What's his name? David looked at his phone. The officer had told him. Gabriel something. Gabriel Reyes, I think. The name landed like a stone dropped from a height. She stood very still. Do you know him? David asked. She didn't answer him. She walked down the hall. Room 9 was at the end of the corridor. The door was half open. Patricia pushed it the rest of the way and stopped. Gabriel Reyes was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed, one arm wrapped in fresh gauze from wrist to mid-forearm. There were soot marks on his jaw and neck that the nurses had partially cleaned. His eyes were tired. They'd been tired this morning too, but this was a different kind of tired. He looked up when she came in. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Your daughter, he said finally. Is she all right? She's all right. Patricia's voice came out steadier than she expected. Because of you. He nodded once, looked at his bandaged arm like he was just noticing it. Mr. Reyes. She stepped closer. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I was wrong this morning. You weren't wrong. I was late. I didn't ask you why. He was quiet for a moment. It wouldn't have changed things. You don't know that. He looked at her then directly with those steady eyes that had not changed since she'd fired him in front of 30 people 6 hours ago. I think I do, actually. I've worked enough places to know when someone's already made up their mind. A nurse appeared at the door, checked something on the chart, smiled neutrally, and left. Patricia waited. Why were you late? She asked. I'm asking now. Gabriel looked at his hands, the unbandaged one, then the wrapped one. Rosie, my daughter, she's 10. There was a situation at her school yesterday. Someone had been approaching kids near the east gate at dismissal. Police came, took statements, but I didn't feel right just dropping her off this morning without talking to the principal first, to make sure they had extra eyes out. He paused. By the time I got downtown and parked and got upstairs, I was 22 minutes late. I knew what it looked like. I knew what would happen. Came anyway because I'd committed to being there. Patricia felt something in her chest tighten. If you'd told me, would it have mattered? He said it without bitterness. Just the question itself, plain and flat. She thought about herself standing at the head of that table. 30 people watching. Her reputation for standards, for consistency, for not blinking. She thought about whether in that moment she would have listened. She was honest enough to admit she didn't know. Let me drive you home, she said. I can take the streetcar. You have a burned arm and you inhaled smoke. You're not taking the streetcar. He studied her for a moment. Okay. They didn't talk in the elevator. The hospital lobby was its own kind of weather, fluorescent and urgent and indifferent to individual stories. Patricia's driver pulled around to the emergency entrance and Gabriel got into the back seat carefully, favoring his arm. Leslieville, he said, and gave the street. They rode in silence for a while. The city outside was all wet black pavement and sodium light. You have a daughter, she said. Rosie, she's 10. Her mother? He was quiet for a beat. She left when Rosie was 6. We're fine. It's fine. Rosie doesn't remember much. Patricia looked out her window. A streetcar passed going the other direction, half full, its light warm against the dark. What did you do before Harwick? She asked. Structural engineering, 8 years. Then life rearranged itself and I needed something with more predictable hours. So you took a facilities job. I took a facilities job. She turned to look at him. You were overqualified. I was appropriately qualified for what I actually needed, he said, which wasn't the same thing. She didn't know what to say to that. It was one of those sentences that didn't leave much room. I want to offer you your job back, she said. Something better than your job. We have a senior operations role open that I've been interviewing for. Ms. Howe. I'm serious, so am I. He looked at her without anger. I don't want a job because you feel guilty. It's not guilt. It is guilt, and I understand it. But guilt isn't a reason to hire someone. And I don't want to walk into that building every day knowing that the reason I'm there is because something bad happened to your daughter, and I happen to be nearby. They pulled up outside his building, a narrow 3-story walk-up on a street of narrow 3-story walk-ups, the kind of street that had been working class since before the city got expensive and had somehow stayed that way. He reached for the door. Rosie, Patricia said. What did she say when you got home? He paused. She hasn't seen me yet. She's at my neighbor's place tonight. I'll pick her up after this. He almost smiled. She's going to ask me 20 questions and then correct my answers. Bridget does the same thing. It's a gift, he said, exhausting but a gift. He got out slowly, stood for a moment with his hand on the car door. Take care of your daughter, Ms. Howe, he said. The rest of this, the job, the apology, it'll wait, but she won't. He closed the door before she could answer. Patricia sat there and watched him walk to the building entrance, moving carefully with his bandaged arm, and something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time moved through her chest and didn't go away. At St. Michael's, Bridget was sitting up in the hospital bed with a bandage on her temple and a sling on her left wrist. And when Patricia came back through the door, she opened her arms before Patricia had even crossed the room. Mom. Patricia held her daughter so tightly that Bridget made a muffled sound of protest and then held on tighter anyway. I'm okay, Bridget said, the way children say it, matter of fact and a little impatient. I told Dad I'm okay. I know. There was a man. He got the door open. He had tools. I know. Bridget pulled back to look at her mother's face. Do you know him? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Yes, is he okay? He'll be okay. Bridget considered this. He stayed with me until the ambulance came. He said I was brave. She looked at her bandaged wrist. He said when you're scared and you still do the thing, that's what brave actually is. Patricia sat down on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's good hand. He sounds like someone worth knowing, she said. Bridget looked at her mother the way children look at adults when they're trying to read something beneath the surface. You should say thank you to him. Like properly. I will. Dad says you're not good at asking for things. Your dad is not wrong. David appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee and a look of someone who had decided, just for tonight, to set aside everything complicated. He gave 1 cup to Patricia without being asked. She took it. The doctor says we can take her home tomorrow morning, he said. I'll stay tonight. I'll stay too. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She looked at Bridget, who had closed her eyes against the pillow. I want to. David sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. The 3 of them were quiet. Outside the window, Toronto glittered cold and indifferent, the way it did in February, the way it always did. In the morning, after Bridget had been discharged and settled on David's couch with 3 blankets and a specific request for soup, Patricia went back to her office. She told Henry what had happened, all of it. He was quiet for a long time. He pulled her out, Henry said finally. Yes, and you fired him yesterday morning. Yes. Henry looked at his desk, looked at the photo of the Greyhound, looked back at her. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. She sat down. This was not a thing she said often. He doesn't want the job back. At least not the way I offered it. How did you offer it? Badly. Okay. Henry folded his hands. Then offer it differently. She called Gabriel Reyes 3 days later. Not from the office. From her apartment on a Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He answered on the 4th ring. It's Patricia Howe, she said. I'm sorry to call on a weekend. A pause. In the background, she could hear something. Music, maybe. Or a TV. How's your daughter? He asked. She's home. She's annoyed that she can't go to swimming for 2 weeks because of the wrist. She paused. She asked about you. That's kind of her. She wants to say thank you. In person, if that's all right. Not anything formal. She's 10, and she has strong opinions about thank yous being done face to face. A longer pause. Rosie would probably like that. She doesn't have a lot of kids her age to talk to. Maybe a park somewhere, Patricia said. Nothing elaborate. The girls can do whatever they want, and we can stand there trying not to make it weird. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Okay, there's a good spot near the lake and the beach. Rosie likes the water. Saturday? Saturday works. She hung up and sat there for a moment with her cold coffee. Through the window, the February sky was finally starting to soften around the edges. Still gray, but a different kind of gray, the kind that was getting ready to change. Saturday was cold but bright, the kind of winter day in Toronto that tricked you into thinking spring was negotiable. Patricia drove Bridget to the beach and found Gabriel and Rosie already there by the water. Rosie in a purple parka with a notebook in her hand, pointing at something in the lake. Bridget got out of the car and looked at Rosie, and then at the notebook and said, "What are you writing down?" Rosie looked up. "Ice formation patterns. The way the ice breaks up at the edge is different depending on wave frequency. I'm tracking it." Bridget stared at her. "That's so cool." Within 30 seconds, they were walking along the shoreline together, Rosie explaining her methodology, and Bridget asking questions with the seriousness of a small journalist. Patricia came to stand beside Gabriel. His bandaged arm was in a partial sleeve now, less wrapped than it had been. "How's the arm?" she asked. "Healing. The physio says it'll be full range of motion by April." He watched the girls. Rosie was up until midnight finding everything she could about wave patterns on Lake Ontario. In case it came up, in case what came up? Meeting Bridget. He paused. She was nervous. Patricia looked at him. She was nervous? She doesn't make friends easily. Smart kids who are interested in things that other kids aren't. It takes a while. He shrugged. She prepared. Patricia watched her daughter crouch down on the ice-edged rocks, asking Rosie something, and Rosie flipping back several pages in her notebook to show her something. Something tightened in her throat. "I want to tell you something," Patricia said. "Not an apology. You've heard the apology. Something different." Gabriel waited. "I've been running Harwick for 9 years. And for 9 years, I've believed that the way you get results is by never showing anything soft, that the minute you make an exception, you've lost something you can't get back." She looked at the lake. "I still believe some of that. But I think I've been using it as a reason not to ask questions, not to be curious about people." She paused. "That morning when you walked in late, I wasn't seeing a person. I was seeing a variable, something to correct." He was quiet for a moment. "You weren't wrong that standards matter." "No. But there's a difference between holding standards and using them as a reason to stop thinking." He looked at her, sideways, the same way he'd looked at her in the boardroom. Steady. Considering. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to offer you something real. Not guilt. Not compensation." She turned to face him. "I want to offer you the Director of Operations position because you are genuinely the best candidate I've looked at in 8 months. I read your engineering background. I talked to your old firm. Henry pulled every record we have on how you managed Harwick's building systems, and every protocol you set up or improved is still running without problems." She held his gaze. "You took a step down to take care of your daughter, and you were so good at the step-down job that it looked like that was all you'd ever done. That's not something most people can do." Gabriel looked at the lake. "The hours would be yours to set," she continued. "The role can be remote 3 days a week. What happens in the office stays in the office, and Rosie stays Rosie's. That's a lot of accommodating," he said, "for someone you fired a week ago. I know. Henry put you up to this. Henry told me I was wrong. I came to the rest of it on my own." A long pause. Rosie laughed at something Bridget said, a real laugh surprised out of her. Gabriel watched his daughter's face. "I'd need the offer in writing before I said yes to anything," he said. "I'll have Henry send it Monday, and I'd need to know that this isn't going to be awkward every day. It will probably be awkward for a while," she said honestly. "I'm not easy to work for. I know that. But I'm trying to be better." He considered that for a moment. Then he said, "Monday, then." The offer arrived Monday. He accepted it Thursday. He started the following week, walking into Harwick Group, not through the service entrance he'd used for 3 years, but through the lobby, past the ferns, into an elevator that took him to the 27th floor. His office had a window that didn't look out at much, but it was his. Henry stopped by his door that first morning with 2 cups of coffee. "Bow tie," Gabriel observed. "It's a good one, Paisley." Henry sat down without being invited. "She's not going to make it easy. I know. She's going to hold you to things." "Good." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Most people don't say good when I tell them that. Most people aren't me." Gabriel pulled the first briefing file toward him. "Tell me where the actual problems are, not the ones on the surface. The real ones." Henry smiled for the first time that morning. "Now you sound like someone who belongs here." 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, Patricia was in back-to-back meetings from 2 o'clock onward when her assistant knocked and held up 2 fingers. She wrapped up the call early, which was not something she did. She drove to Bridget's school herself, no driver. She was 4 minutes early. She stood on the pavement outside the gymnasium with the other parents. some of whom she'd met at school events, most of whom she'd only ever seen from the distance of scheduled pickups, and she waited. The science presentations were displayed on folding tables along one wall. Bridget's project was about the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies and the effect of temperature change on their roots. It was thorough and well-sourced and argued with the focused certainty of someone who had clearly spent too many evenings on it. David was there. He stood next to Patricia, and they watched their daughter explain butterfly thermodynamics to a teacher who was trying hard to keep up. "She's good," David said. "She is. She told me Gabriel's daughter is teaching her about wave patterns. Apparently Rosie has a methodology," David smiled. "Bridget said she wants to do a joint project next term, water systems and migratory patterns. Something about mapping temperature change at the lakeshore." Patricia watched her daughter, gesturing at her poster with the precise confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. Something she'd had herself, once, before she'd learned to keep it tamped down in professional settings. "Let them," Patricia said, "whatever they want to do." It was Henry who called her one evening in April, when the snow had finally given up and the city was doing its tentative spring thing. "Turn on the local news," he said. "Why? Just turn it on." She found the channel. A reporter was standing outside a community center in Scarborough, and on the screen, in the slightly deer-in-headlights posture of a person who had not expected to be on television, was Gabriel Reyes. He was talking about a school safety consultation workshop he'd been running on his own time, applying what he knew from engineering and emergency systems to help school boards identify vulnerability gaps. "You didn't have to do this," the reporter was saying. "You have a full-time job. You have a daughter. Why?" Gabriel looked like he was choosing his words carefully. "Because it's something I know how to do," he said, "and because there are kids in this city whose schools need it so." He looked mildly uncomfortable. "That's it, really." Patricia sat with her phone in her hand and watched the segment end. She texted Gabriel, "Saw the news. Good work." His reply came 20 minutes later. "Henry told you to watch, didn't he?" "Immediately." "Of course he did." A pause. "Then how's Bridget?" "Annoying her father about the butterfly project. She wants to expand it into a 3-year longitudinal study. Rosie already has the lake sections mapped out." "Of course she does." She set the phone down on her kitchen table and looked around her apartment. The clean lines of it, the quiet of it, the expensive art on the walls that she'd bought because it seemed like the right kind of art for a CEO to have. She thought about Gabriel's apartment in Leslieville, the fold-out couch, the leaf collection organized by species. She thought about Rosie preparing for a meeting like she was a diplomat. She picked up her phone again. "Can I ask you something personal you can ask? How do you do it? The part where you're actually present. I keep trying and I keep finding myself half somewhere else." A longer pause this time. "It got easier when I stopped trying to be good at everything at once," he wrote. "You can't be a great parent and a great professional at the exact same hour, but you can be both over a week, a month, if you keep showing up." Grace used to say that. She typed, then caught herself. "Sorry, wrong person." Rosie's mom was named Lee, he wrote back. She used to say that when you commit to someone, you commit to showing up even when it's inconvenient. She just applied that to her own life eventually and not to us. But the idea wasn't wrong. Patricia didn't know what to say. She sat with it. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "It's fine. It really is." "Still." "Yeah," he wrote. "Still." In June, the girls did their first joint presentation at the Community Science Fair at Woodbine Park. Bridget on butterfly roots, Rosie on shoreline temperature patterns, and the two of them spending 20 minutes arguing in front of 3 different judges about the ways the data overlapped, which was, everyone agreed, the most interesting part. Gabriel and Patricia stood together watching this argument unfold. It was the kind of standing together that had happened gradually, over several months of coffee near the lake while the girls collected data, over Henry's increasingly unsubtle commentary about chemistry and timing, over late emails that started about operations reports and ended somewhere else entirely. "They're going to be insufferable when they're teenagers," Gabriel said. "Absolutely," Patricia agreed. "Completely insufferable." He looked at her sideways. She looked back. "You're different than you were in February," he said. February was a long time ago. It was 4 months ago. 4 months is a long time when you're paying attention. He considered that. That's probably true. Rosie's won second place. Bridget argued that the joint elements deserved their own category and submitted a formal written objection to the judging panel, which they accepted with professional seriousness. On the drive home, Bridget said from the back seat, "Mom, do you like Gabriel?" Patricia kept her eyes on the road. "He's my colleague. That's not what I asked. You're 11, so I notice things." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I respect him," she said carefully. "I trust him. and I was wrong about him at first, and I had to figure out how to be sorry in a way that meant something. That's a lot. Bridget considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. Rosie says he talks about you at home. She told you that? She says he doesn't talk about most people, but he talks about you. Patricia drove in silence for another block. Go do your homework, she said, which was not an answer, but Bridget seemed satisfied with it anyway. It was late August before anything was said directly, and even then, it was said in the parking lot of a grocery store in the beaches on a Sunday afternoon while Rosie and Bridget were inside arguing about whether the pasta should be rotini or penne, which was an argument that had been going on for 6 minutes and showed no signs of resolving. I'm not good at this, Patricia said. They were leaning against his truck in the August heat, and the words came out more plainly than she'd intended. At what? At saying things out loud before I've thought them through completely. I know. He was looking at the store entrance. You write emails at 2 in the morning that are very good, but clearly represent about 4 hours of editing. She laughed, which surprised her. That obvious? The timestamps, Patricia. She looked at him. He was looking back. I think, she said, that I would like to try. Something. I don't know exactly what, but something. He was quiet for a moment, not the blank quiet of someone buying time. The considered quiet of someone who was taking the thing seriously. Me too, he said. The automatic doors slid open, and Rosie came out holding a bag of rotini triumphantly, while Bridget followed behind her, with the expression of someone who had accepted defeat, but was reserving the right to revisit the decision later. Rotini, Rosie announced. Under protest, Bridget said. Noted, said Patricia. Appreciated, said Gabriel. They walked back to the cars together in the August afternoon, the city humming around them the way it did when it had finally decided to be warm, and the girls walked ahead of the adults and argued about sauce. And Patricia thought about the February morning that had seemed like the worst kind of mistake, and how it had somehow, through about 40 different accidents of timing and stubbornness and a pry bar in a work truck, become something she wouldn't trade for anything. You couldn't plan for that. You could only show up, stay open. Let people be more than the story you'd already decided about them. She had learned that the hard way, which was, she was beginning to think, the only way it really stuck.